Congress, and one of the things that he said was that you can be rest assured that the new cabinet is going to be smaller than the one that it is at the moment, and that the African National Congress says that the government will take a bigger role in terms of international relations going forward. So a smaller cabinet on the way if the ANC wins this election. Now, the Independent Electoral Commission says it will look into possible irregularities following yesterday's voting. The electoral body says that it will conduct an audit that will determine the extent of the loopholes.
The Electoral Commission will urgently conduct an audit of results and votes cast in a sample of voting stations to ascertain if double voting occurred. The audit will cover a statistically representative sample of voting stations, as well as where complaints and allegations of double voting have been received.
The IEC also says that it's confident that it has a strong system that will easily expose anything that's untoward.
We are confident that our system is strong. It will throw out the exceptions so that we can investigate them, and that combining that with any objection that we receive from a political party with regard to anything, not just this particular issue that we're discussing, we will investigate. And we are confident that that creates a situation where our results and our elections have integrity. But we recognize that there are concerns. We are not trying to evade those concerns or trivialize those concerns. We are grappling with them to give you the assurance that we know our system gives us.
All right, so that was the Independent Electoral Commission fielding questions, concerns that are being raised and being put forward to them by journalists, of course, on behalf of citizens that have been contacting them. All right, so the most interesting part of the elections now underway is the vote counting, and the numbers coming through at this point are a response to the political campaigns that we've seen in the last few weeks. Let's explore some of those responses, and I could start with the National Assembly. We're now 50.6% of the way in terms of the count, and what it's telling us is that the ANC currently 56.78% in the lead, and the DA at 23.7%, and the EFF 9.49%. So not a major shift, Prof. But what I'd like to think, if the local government elections are anything to go by, Johannesburg, Tshwane, Nelson Mandela Bay, if those figures haven't come in yet, should the ANC be sitting at a much higher percentage at this point if they are going to get some comfort about getting through at 50% overall at the end of the day? Because 56, that's before the big urban centers come in. Should they have been higher at this point?
Well, I do think that it depends on whether their losses in the urban areas is now stabilizing, because there was a progressive and sometimes dramatic decline in 2014 national and provincial elections and in 2016. And some of the issues were very specific, the e-tolling, the issue of corruption, and the perception of the party that was seen as being arrogant. If now you do have the new leadership, which seem to have an appeal to the business sector, to the black business, middle class and so forth, and also the workers now are no longer saying we're no longer going to vote for the leader of the party, it might just stabilize, and they may actually be happy not to have further losses. If that's be the case, then they could hold steady around 50%. But if the trend of decline was continuing, they would have to be worried, because that's where you have the highest density of population, and the only party that could be gaining massively there would be your EFF, And the key thing is, will that tilt them towards the double digits, 10% and above?
Right.
And if EFF and ANC are benefiting, or some of the new parties from that, DA also has to be worried, because as they gain, DA declines.
All right, so let's take a look at some of these other parties. And I'm just wondering, parties like the UDM, they just seem to not be getting traction. Election after election, they just don't seem to be getting any kind of momentum anymore. Might we start to see the end of some of these parties, UDM, COPE, perhaps not this election maybe, but the next one, unless something dramatic happens?
Certainly, these are the parties which are on the borderline. The only saving grace at this moment is the fact that we have one of the lowest threshold to get a party into parliament, which is, even if a party has one member, 35,000, 38,000 supporters, they would still have one person in parliament for the next 5 years. Otherwise, if you were to raise such a threshold, many parties would be wiped out of the system. And some of the people who are debating the future of our electoral system are even beginning to debate the utility of having 40, 50 political parties instead of having an effective number of parties that can have a real impact towards nation building and so forth. So to that extent, these parties may be rendered weak.
Yeah. No matter who wins and what margins, one gets a sense that a reset button needs to happen, and the politics of going forward after this election has to be completely different from the old order, because there is this issue of 9.8 million people who didn't even bother. So what will have parties learned, those that have won and those that have perhaps lost their way?
Well, the biggest problem that we're facing is a legitimacy crisis of our body politic, which means the number of people not participating at all, even though they are eligible voters. And that also being quite a significant number amongst the youth, who are most impacted by most problems, unemployment, education crisis, health, crime, and so forth. That has to be significant, because we ought to be saying, once they get alienated from the main body politic, where do they express themselves? Then you wonder why South Africa is a world protest and service delivery protest capital, and the level of strikes and so forth. So that in itself is a key problem that every party should be worried about. The second one, even when a ruling party has problems, most of its voters do not seem to transfer en masse to other parties. They simply stay at home, as is the case with some of your traditional ANC voters. What should they be worried about, and what should they consider? ANC has to revive and overhaul itself. It cannot go forward with the perception that it is harboring corrupt individuals. Cannot go forward with a sense that it has become arrogant about the power that they hold. It cannot go forward with such high policy turnover, leadership turnover, because people need certainty and, more importantly, implementation capacity. With the DA, they have to worry about the revolving door situation, where as they try to diversify, the groups they attracted earlier, white voters, start leaving,
and the
minorities start leaving. As we are trying to catch the others are leaving. The EFF also has to worry about the fact that they had exerted so much effort into this at the time when the ruling party was at its weakest. The party divided, the party being exposed in the state capture, that you can't wrestle them to the ground in any significant way, and they're still struggling to get into double digits, means that their core constituency is really committed, but they are not speaking to constituencies more diverse than their core constituency. Therefore, they might reach a maturation stage earlier and their peak. if they were preparing to be government of the future, they'll have to do more than that. Their sometimes violent rhetoric, which may be seen as divisive, not answering directly on some of the accusations of corruption, may also be some of the things that they have to be looking at. Of course, the internal party democracy. And you move on to the Freedom Front Plus. I think they're quite clear that their focus is the Afrikaner constituency. But in a transforming South Africa, you can go so far with that. And beyond that, what do you do? Generally, other parties ought to be worried if ANC at its weakest could not be wrestled to the ground. What if they recover?
Right. If you knock them out, you've got to knock them out with a killer blow.
You know, in boxing, if you are going 15 rounds or 12 rounds and you suddenly see your opponent dazed, you throw a flurry of punches and you realize that the opponent is not going down, you start feeling tired. You start worrying about the long distance.
All right, Prof. Somadoda Fikeni, we'll continue to have our conversation as we unpack what perhaps some of these initial results may mean. We're 50.6% of the way in at the moment. And at the moment, what it's saying and what it's telling us is that the ANC out in front, 56.76%. The DA 23.01% and the EFF 9.51%. And that's the situation after 50.6% of the votes counted to date. So still a long way to go, but a picture starting to emerge, perhaps not surprising, and we'll continue to explore all of that still to come. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll continue going around the country to our reporters on the ground.